was asking. So my first role at DoorDash was to be head of special operations. But I quickly realized, and DoorDash quickly realized that I fundamentally did not understand the customer and therefore did not understand what the customer problem was. And so I remember this conversation with the then president and chief operating officer, and he walked in, he was like, Abby, stop what you're doing. I want you to take Austin. I used to live in Austin back then. And he was like, go win Austin. I was like, CP, what is win Austin? He was like, truly make the customers in Austin not forget about DoorDash. And what you'll get from that is that you'll see your market share go up, you'll see your P&L go great, or go better. I was like, awesome. So the back to some of the other points about there are these natural antibodies that develop as you scale and you grow big. And what the president's push was is like, how do you build that culture of always having that nature of always trying to act fast? So his way of putting that in me was, go learn in Austin. Go build your startup in Austin. If you had one market, how do you build a strategy around Austin? Like Faizan mentioned, we had a whole bunch of data, and I could imagine in a previous life, I would have spent 2 weeks running a pricing analysis, 3 days getting that approved, going ahead and then spending a couple of days implementing that strategy, and then turning around and maybe taking the data for another 2 weeks and understanding what that impact was. At Austin, what we did is there's a place called Torchy's Tacos. And every day during the day, I was changing prices on different cohorts of customers to look at the level of conversion that I would see on the app to figure out where can I get the signal in order to make more definitive pricing adjustments. That is just one example of the speed and the data that has evolved over time in terms of what go-to-market really is. Andrew's second question is like, how did part of my role was that I had to go and launch new markets for DoorDash. I'll give an interesting example, maybe two examples. One is around what we had to do in Florida. Delivery, especially food delivery, is actually a very, very localized business, which means for those in Florida, Uber Eats was a big incumbent in the market. How do you win against an incumbent was, again, understanding how does the industry really work. In logistics, just as an example, especially in food delivery, it's all about demand density. So if you can get strong amount of demand density, you can get customers to really like your product, they will order more, your drivers get more money, your restaurant get more money. So if you can understand truly what makes the customer, or what does the customer want, you can adjust your go-to-market strategy accordingly. So for us, if you had to go after Miami, for example, we used to go everywhere except for the strongholds of Uber Eats. So go away from downtown, you started on the periphery, you went to like Fort Lauderdale, all of the around areas, build your own pockets of density so that you can then go ahead and then compete with Uber Eats internally. New York was actually a completely opposite way, where New York, we had a separate problem because the customer in New York, same industry, same company, a different customer want that was based geographically. And therefore our strategy of trying to win New York was completely different, where we actually did a whole different things around ads, around media, around pricing, around delivery radii versus trying to do this overall approach. So again, incumbent or not, the big takeaway is always try to figure out what is the most important problem for your customer. And I promise you they will be different even in the same company, market that you have. And how can you best position yourself to win that customer?
Yeah, I think if I was to generalize what you're saying is it's find that wedge, right? I think one thing that DoorDash did really well early on is identify that suburban markets are up for grabs, right? While Uber Eats and Grubhub were fighting for urban cities, they went after the suburban market. And that was the wedge that they found, obsessed with that, the suburban customer in that market, and then found a way to win those markets and then scale that over time, right? And that goes back to what Ali was even saying earlier, which is what is that iterative process, right? You won't be able to capture the entire market at once. So you find that wedge, you figure out a positioning, and then you obsess with that customer, you capture that segment, and then rinse and repeat that for the next wedge, and the next wedge, and the next wedge after.
For sure. And right before this, we were talking about kind of how you're tackling distribution as an early stage startup, right? What you're doing is really unique, and we're seeing it as kind of a content first company and growing content-led growth, right? And kind of the similar strategies you were talking about. So walk us through, I think, more actionably for the audience, a lot of students, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with like low, if not no code tools and vibe coding. I'll get to it later in my talk, but shipping with Replit on your iPhone, and like, what are some interesting things that you're seeing work, and like, how are you tackling GTM in your space? You came from DoorDash, and now you're in fintech and consumer fintech. So walk us through that, and how that's at an early stage startup, how that's different than say DoorDash, although startup still conventionally a very big company, right?
Yeah, I'll kind of go contrary to what I said earlier. Data is so important, but early stage, when you don't have the data, how do you actually start, right? You have this cold start problem where you don't have a ton of data to act on, so how do you get started? And that's where intuition and this art versus science is a balance early on, right? So initially, you rely on intuition and your gut, and you try to understand what your customers want through interviews, through qualitative data, and then over time, as your data matures, then you start to rely on data. Right? So early on, that's a huge stark difference, which is just relying on intuition and understanding of the customer. And then going to where your customers are, right? A lot of our users are in Reddit, so we literally go and understand what they're saying in those threads and what they're looking for, and looking for tactics to find that information in ways that just would be very different from before. But that's it. I would say that's the biggest difference, the art versus science, right? Early on, it's very much intuition and gut driven, and then we confirm that with data over time. And then sort of build that. But that doesn't mean that you don't have metrics, right? So tracking metrics is super important, even at the early stages, because if you don't have the data, then you'll just be flying blind over time. And that's what's going to allow you to iterate and figure out what's working, what's not working. But start with the intuition, with your gut, with your vision, and then sort of bake the data into it, and then iterate with the metrics in place.
Can I add to that?
Sorry, I'm going to hijack a little bit of this conversation, which is, I think the intuition part is actually very spot on. And the way to think about intuition, at least for me, was how do you put yourself, how do you solve again the problem for your customer? How do you build that intuition based on the data that you have? Part of the way I do that is I have a rule of 100, which is at minimum talk to 100 customers. Not surveys, talk to 100 customers. That could be your end consumers. In our case, that was our drivers. In our case, that was our merchant partners. And then I was constantly on the road doing deliveries as much as I could, as well as being part of customer support. Another way of trying to build that intuition when you have a cold start problem. I will share a small story, which was I was asked to go and launch more rural markets at DoorDash. Again, to Faizan's point, the amount of data that we had on rural markets was less. But the prevalent theme over there, that there was an assumption that markets over a certain amount of population didn't have the size to be able to sustain a fleet. So what we did is we flew to Owensboro, Kentucky, Marfa, Texas, and Amelia Island out here in Florida. And we actually try to speak to folks about, okay, if we brought DoorDash, would you guys use it? And we got resoundingly yes, but we got no. We got some no's as well. But we had 100 conversations. And from that, we launched 10 cities, 8 of them failed. From those 2 cities, we found out what happened. We spoke to 100 customers in those cities. In one city, we wanted to be able to talk to 50 because there were 300 people in that town. That's separate. And then we launched more cities. And then we found out that there was a secret sauce. There was a key elements in that strategy that we got from that intuition of talking to several, at this point, 1,000 customers. And based on that, we launched about I think it was 1,200 more markets. And we changed DoorDash's coverage. I I think it was 85% back then to about 95% plus based on that.
Yeah, one other thing I'll add is I think the risk tolerance is very different, right? I think as you scale at DoorDash and we're making decisions, we have to be careful because there are consequences that are significant to the decisions that we're making. We're early stage, I think we have the total opposite attitude. It's like, if it takes a lot of time to discuss it, just do it. And if we fail, we'll just try something else, right? So the risk tolerance is very different at a smaller scale. You just want to do the thing that you need to do. If you fail, and you iterate from there as opposed to wait for a ton of data to act, right? So acting quickly is just super important at this stage.
That makes sense. And I know we have to wrap soon, so I want to focus on the most important, I think, question, or the most important theme we're hitting on, right? Which is, we talked about this late last night. You know, as the ability to create, products is becoming easier and easier for many students here, probably in their dorm room on Cursor, yelling at it and saying, no, tweak this, tweak that, right? Or on Riplet on their phone in class saying, make me an app that does this, right? We got into this interesting conversation last night about how, the proliferation of software doesn't necessarily mean, that software is now a commodity, right? And product matters a lot more, right? So, Faizan, maybe start with you. How did you, your product's quite niche. It's quite unique, and 10 years ago, no one could probably believe that you could build a kind of investing app on the back of, or I guess investing analytics on the back of a meme community on Reddit, right? So I'd love to hear how you understand, maybe talk about communities a bit, and how you understand the importance of product in a world where anybody can create software.
Yeah, great question. We were just talking about this yesterday, how engineering is becoming commodity more and more. But I think something that's implicit there that I don't personally believe in, which is that just because engineering is a commodity doesn't mean good products are, right? It takes a lot of skill, effort, and iteration to build great products that people love, right? If it was that easy, then there will be no competition, right? Everyone will be winning, but it takes a lot of effort and skill to build good products, and that isn't a commodity, at least not yet. So we put a ton of time and attention. I think when I looked at the fintech audience and what we were trying to build, we noticed that there was actually a gap in consumer experience that, coming from a consumer product background, we deeply cared about the consumer experience and the differentiation in the consumer experience. And that's what really drew us to the fintech sector. And I don't think, product is a commodity, good products is a commodity just yet. And I think there's a lot of intuition and, founder to market fit that goes into understanding how to build a good product. And we'll see what LLMs do in the next 10 years. I could be wrong here, but I think at least at the moment, engineering is a commodity, but good products are not. So there's a lot to learn there, and a lot of that is also just about what Adi said, right? Like iterating, obsessing with your customer. Those things, you cannot do just programmatically, right? You have to get out there and talk to your customers. You have to identify that wedge, right? Just the program is not going to do that for you. So. And then translating that into a good product, right? One of the biggest product lessons that I've extracted throughout my life is you don't build what the users want, you build what the users need, right? And there's a subtle but a significant distinction there. And a lot of times you see people just churning out these product features that the users want, and then the product just becomes this Frankenstein of a thing that can deliver value but isn't really a quality product, right? So it takes a lot of cumulative diverse sort of mindset and effort to build an amazing product.
The only thing I'll add to that, which is echoing what Faizan said, and maybe recapping what I started with, especially from what I learned the most in engineering was problem solving, and what has not been commoditized, now I don't think will ever be, is how to be a really, really customer-centric problem solver. And that is going to be the way that you differentiate yourself, your company can differentiate yourself.
I think that's it. I don't know if you guys have any other closing remarks, but hopefully that was, we wanted to keep it pretty informative on a student level, and how you think about, there's so many things to build now, and it's so easy to build things, so how do you not lose the plot, right?
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing. I think one of the things that I've seen over my life, I've been part of multiple startups. Products fail because of go-to-market all the time, and I think early stage founders don't focus enough on go-to-market, and especially if you're builders. I'm an engineer myself, so I love building. So we get too hung up on the building itself. So obsess over your go-to-market, right? Even more than the product early on. Because no idea is precious at the early stages. You want to learn what works, what does not work through your customer. So really obsess with the go-to-market and let that inform and drive your product over time with the layer of your product vision that you have.
I agree with everything Faizan said, and I believe that there is really a very limited difference between product development and go-to-market. They're so synonymous and go hand in hand with that end goal. If there's one thing to take away from this conversation is the problem-solving aspect and the avenue that comes out in is building a good product is by how you go to market in bringing that product the best way to solve the problem for your customer, right? So like, don't think of them as two separate areas. Oh, you got to do go-to-market and then product development. They're very, very much linked and tied together. And end goal, solve the problem for your customer.
I think that's it. Well, guys, this has been a ton of fun. If anyone has questions or just wants to chat for a couple of hours on go-to-market, come find us and we'll be happy to chat. So thanks guys.
Awesome. That was great. So we're going to keep Andrew up here. He's going to give a conversation on how competition is for winners.